Hello students and welcome to video 2 in chapter 2.5 organizational culture. In the previous video we did what is organizational culture, and we briefly looked at some reasons why there might be cultural clash within an organization. In this video we're going to look at types of cultural models with a focus on Charles Handy Gods of Management. So let's look at Gods of Management. And this was a 1978 book written by Charles Handy, who is just behind my face there. There we go. There's Charles Handy. And in this book, he argued that different organizations need different cultures to succeed, which these days I think is fairly commonly accepted. And what he did was he came up with a structure of classifying different types of corporate cultures within a model. And so what he did was he had two axes. On one axis, he had the degree of centralization, so more centralized, less centralized, where more centralized means that there's more control of the business at the top. So basically what this means is that the CEO, top managers are going to be making all the decisions. Less centralized means that those decisions are passed down more towards people, towards the bottom of the organization. On the other axis, there was formality. So on the one side, you had less formal, and on the other side, you had more formal. And then what happened was within each of the four quadrants, there was a type of corporate culture, and he named them after the gods. So we've got Zeus, we've got Apollo, we've got Dionysus, and Athena. And there's also different names for these, as we'll see when we go through these. So what we'll do is we'll go through each of these in order and just go through a little bit more detail about what they mean. So here we go. The first one is called Zeus, or power culture. And within that matrix we just saw, this is more centralized and less formal. So just go back to that matrix. You can see Zeus is over here, more centralized and less formal. And basically what this means is it is centralized. So you've got decision making at the top of the organization, but it's slightly less formal. So what this means is that generally you're going to have some sort of dominant person or dominant group in control of the organization. It's going to be autocratic and centralized decision making. So employees are not going to be given that much control over decision makings and things like this. This is also called power culture, as I mentioned. And generally, the picture that Charles Handy used was that of a spider's web. So you can see at the middle, there's going to be very much where the organization is controlled. And then you've got this big dominant force, which is obviously this spider. Now, how might we observe this? Well, you might see this where management have private parking spaces, or there's like a management suite or things like that, where, again, this dominant person at the top of the organization. So moving on to role culture, which they called Apollo. So this is more centralized, more formal. And in this situation, again, we've got more centralized. So the power is at the top of the organization, but again, it's more formal. So in this situation, employees have well-defined roles and responsibilities. There are clear job titles and roles, and it's generally going to be a tall and hierarchical, so lots of levels of hierarchy and quite bureaucratic. And one of the best examples of this is, say, for example, the military. And so within the military, it's very centralized, very formal structure. Everyone has clear job titles, there are clear roles, and everyone knows what they're doing. And a lot of these businesses tend to be traditional, and this is not always true, but some tend to lack creativity. Generally, when you've got a very rigid and formal, bureaucratic and hierarchical structure, it can, not necessarily, but it can limit creativity. And so the picture that was used here is that of like a temple. In here, you've got that the pillars are the hierarchy of the organization. So because everyone's got clear jobs, clear roles, everyone knows what they're doing. And so this creates stability in the company. And so that's the stability here is represented by these the pillars within the temple. Moving on to the next one, which is task culture, also called Athena. And so this is less centralized, more formal. Now, in this situation, it's less centralized, which means that some power is passed down the organization, but it's still quite formal. And so, in that sense, teams are formed, but these teams are given the power to actually solve problems. So, again, these teams are going to have that power. And here, there's going to be a focus on teamwork and getting things done. The getting things done is the more formal. So they still got tasks to fill out. They're still going to have objectives and goals, but they are given the authority and creativity is encouraged. And the picture here they use is some sort of matrix structure. So in 2.2, we talk about matrix structure. And so that's an example of task culture. Finally, the Dionysian culture, I think that's how we say it, is also called person culture. And this is less centralized, less formal. So this is similar to that. But again, power is passed down the organization. But here, this tends to be individuals working on their own. There's no emphasis on teamwork. So a good example possibly might be a firm of lawyers, where within a firm of lawyers, individual lawyers are working on their own cases, and there's no really need for teamwork. Obviously, there may be teamwork, and they might consult other lawyers or work within teams, but generally they're seen as independent entities within the organization. And this is represented by a cell, and we can see that there's people within here working in different places. So let's move on. The syllabus learning objective is types of organizational culture. For example, Charles Handy's Gods of Management. Now, it's interesting with the IB as written now. What that means is that if you have a question on this, then obviously you can use Charles Handy's Gods of Management syllabus model in order to answer the question. But you could use other models. What I'm going to quickly do is just go through some additional models that you might actually use to answer questions. One's called the Schneider cultural model. And here, his axes are slightly different. You've got reality versus possibility. And on the other axis, you've got a focus on the people or on the focus on the company. And then you get the 4 quadrants: collaboration, we succeed by working together; control, cultivation, or competence. So they're quite similar to Handy's model, but they're using different axes and they're given different names. Another model is the organizational cultural assessment instrument. And this is using, again, different axes. So we've got flexibility, internal versus external, and stability versus flexibility. And then you get clan, adhocracy, hierarchy, and market. So a lot of these models are quite similar. They're not always in a quadrant or a matrix structure. There are different versions. But as you can see, there are different people have come up with different models. Okay, that is all of the learning objectives done for this chapter. I'll see you next time.